I was topping off the lantern at the north window when the first light started coming up behind the fog. It wasn't much light. Marrow Hollow doesn't get much before dawn, especially in December. But the sky had gone from black to a dirty gray, and I could see the last fence post down by the north road. The fog was pressed against the glass so hard it looked solid, like somebody had packed the whole window with wet cotton. The house smelled like oil and cold ashes. Outside it smelled worse. Wet ash mixed with something sweet and rotten. I didn't know what made a smell like that, and I didn't want to find out. My hands were cracked across the knuckles. They'd been that way for years. 30 years of damp cold will do that to you. The skin splits and heals and splits again, and after a while you stop noticing unless the oil gets into the cuts. I unscrewed the cap on the lantern and poured the last of the oil in. The lantern flame had gotten low. That was why I was up. If it went out before morning, I didn't know how long the house would stay safe. Nobody knew exactly how long. The rules didn't say. They just said to keep a lantern burning at night. I looked through the glass while I tightened the cap. The last fence post was still there. Beyond it stood one of the tall, thin figures. I didn't look right at it. You learn not to stare at things like that. I could see enough without looking. Long shape, pale arms hanging down. Head bent a little, like it was listening for something on the other side of the fence. I turned the wick up and watched the flame grow. In the adjoining room, Isabella was asleep behind her smaller window lamp. I could see the yellow light through the gap in the doorway. Her coat was hanging from the chair beside the bed. She'd kicked one of the blankets down onto the floor, which was something she did most nights, even though she was always cold when she woke up. I checked the smaller lamp anyway. It was still burning. The clocks in town didn't agree with each other. They hadn't for as long as I could remember. The one in our kitchen said a little after 3. The clock at Kinsley's said something closer to 5. At least it had the last time I saw it. Orion kept one that had stopped at 11:17 and never moved again. None of them were right. There wasn't a dog in Marrow Hollow that barked anymore either. We still had dogs, or at least people had dogs, but they didn't make a sound. They'd look toward the fog and stand there with their ears up. Sometimes they'd whine. I carried the empty oil can away from the window and set it on the table. There were 2 rules everybody followed. Keep a lantern lit at night to hold the reachers away. Never let the fog enter your body. That's what people said anyway. The rules had been passed down since the fog came in from the North Road in December of 1988. Nobody knew who'd made them up. Nobody knew if they were rules in the way a law was a rule, or just something somebody tried once and kept doing because it seemed to help. Nobody knew what the fog was. Nobody knew where it ended. Kinsley had stopped answering people when they talked to her. At first I figured she was just being stubborn. Kinsley could be stubborn. She'd been that way for as long as I'd known her, and there wasn't much use in taking it personally. Then she stopped turning around. Every day she'd sit at her north window and face the glass. If somebody knocked, she wouldn't answer. If somebody waved from the road, she wouldn't wave back. She just stayed there looking toward the fence. I'd seen it happen before. People started losing things first. Names, faces, words. Then they stopped acting like anybody was home inside them. I was carrying the fresh lantern from the shelf when I heard Orion calling from down the road. "Ronnie." I looked toward Isabella's room. She hadn't woken up. "Ronnie, get over here." Orion's voice came from Kinsley's house, 2 doors down. He didn't shout often. When he did, I listened. I left Isabella asleep behind her lit lamp and went outside with the lantern in my hand. The cold got through my coat right away. It wasn't a sharp cold. It was damp and heavy, the kind that worked into your sleeves and settled against your skin. The fog covered the road from one side to the other. I could see Orion's lantern ahead of me and the dark shape of Kinsley's house behind it. He was standing in the front doorway. "She changed overnight," he said when I came up. What happened? Come look. I followed him inside. Kinsley was sitting upright in the chair beside her north window. Her eyes were open. She was looking through the glass, not at us. Gray vapor leaked from the corners of her mouth. It wasn't smoke. It moved too slowly for smoke, and it hung around her face before the room took it. Every few seconds, her lips moved. She shaped words with them. I couldn't hear anything. I stepped closer. Kinsley? She didn't look at me. Her mouth kept moving. Orion stood beside the door with his lantern held out. The light made Kinsley's face look thin and washed out. She didn't seem afraid. She didn't seem like she knew we were there. Kinsley, I said again. Nothing. She pushed herself up from the chair. I reached for her, but Orion caught my arm. Kinsley walked toward the front door. Orion, let go. Once they turn toward the fence, you can't stop them. His fingers tightened around my sleeve. If she reaches the fog, the Reachers will use her to come closer. Kinsley opened the door. The gray air came in around her. I pulled free of Orion and went after her. She was already halfway down the walk. Her slippers made a soft scraping sound against the wet boards, and then the gravel. Orion moved ahead of me and stepped into her path. Kinsley, stop. She walked around him. He moved in front of her again. She walked around him again. It wasn't that she refused to listen. Refusing meant she had heard you. Kinsley didn't seem to hear anything. The vapor kept slipping from her mouth. Her lips moved like she was trying to remember a sentence. We followed her onto the north road. The last fence post stood ahead in the gray. I could see the figure beyond it now, and another one farther down the fence line. They were still. All of them were still. I kept my eyes on Kinsley. Kinsley, come back, I said. Listen to me. Come back inside. She didn't slow down. Orion got in front of her one more time. She walked straight toward him until he had to step aside. He reached for her shoulder but stopped before touching her. Kinsley crossed the road and stepped past the last fence post. The fog opened. A pale, jointed arm unfolded from the gray. It came out too far and bent in the middle where no arm ought to bend. It wrapped around Kinsley's body and pulled her forward. She didn't cry out. The fog closed over her. Orion grabbed my coat, but I was already standing still. There was nothing to chase, nothing to fight. Just wet gravel and the two small slippers she'd left behind. It took me the rest of the day to get back from Kinsley's house. The road wasn't far, but I stopped more than once. I kept thinking I heard something behind me. Every time I turned around, there was only the fog and the fence, and the two slippers sitting in the gravel where Kinsley had left them. Orion walked with me as far as my house. He didn't say much on the way back. There wasn't much to say. We'd both seen what happened. At my door, he stopped and looked at the lantern in my hand. Keep it burning, he said. I know.
Ronnie, listen. They all start the same way.
I looked at him. Names first, then faces, then speech. He'd told me that before, but I'd never heard him say it like that. Not as a rule, as something he'd watched happen more than once. Kinsley forgot us? I asked. She was already forgetting. She knew me this morning. Maybe she did. He said it plain, like that made it easier. It didn't. I went inside and closed the door behind me. The house was colder than I'd left it. The north window lamp had burned down while I was gone, and the flame was barely more than a blue point at the top of the wick. I turned it up. The flame jumped and filled the glass. I poured in more oil from the can on the table and tightened the cap. My hands were still wet from the fog. The oil got into the cuts across my knuckles and made them sting. Isabella was sitting on her bed with her mother's old coat wrapped around her. She'd pulled the sleeves over her hands. The room was dark except for the small lamp beside the window. She looked at me when I came in. Dad? I'm here. Where did you go? I went to see Kinsley. She thought about that. Her face didn't change much, but she looked down at the blanket. Is she sick? I didn't answer right away. Orion had said the ones who were ready got taken. I didn't know if Kinsley had been ready. I didn't know what ready meant. Maybe it meant empty. Maybe it meant there wasn't enough left inside her for the Reachers to take. She went out to the fence, I said. Why? I don't know. That wasn't exactly true. I knew why. I just didn't know how to explain it to an 8-year-old. The fog had gotten into her somehow. It had pulled the names out of her, and then the rest of her had followed. I sat down beside Isabella and took the photograph from the small table near her bed. It was one of the few pictures we had left. Sierra was standing in front of the house with one hand resting on Isabella's shoulder. Isabella was little in the picture, maybe 4. Sierra had her hair pulled back and she was smiling at the camera. I held it out. Who is this? Isabella looked at the photograph. That's Mama. What's her name? She looked at me again. Mama. Her other name. Isabella rubbed one of her fingers along the edge of the blanket. She stared at the picture for a long time. Sierra, she said finally. It came out soft, like she wasn't sure the word belonged there. That's right. She kept looking at the picture. What did she look like? Isabella frowned. She had brown hair, she said. She did. And blue eyes. That's right. Isabella leaned closer to the photograph. The lamp beside her made a yellow spot on the glass. I don't remember her face. I didn't say anything. The woman in the picture was smiling. I could see the little crease beside her mouth and the way one side of her hair had come loose near her ear. I knew that face better than I knew my own. I'd watched it sleep. I'd watched it get angry with me. I'd watched it disappear into the fog 3 years earlier. Isabella, I said. She handed the picture back. Can I go to sleep? Not yet. She looked tired. I was tired too, but I didn't want to let her sleep. I had the feeling that if she went to sleep, she might wake up with something else gone. The cat came in through the crack beneath the door. It was a gray thing with a white patch under its chin. It rubbed against Isabella's ankle and climbed onto the bed. Isabella looked down at it. Come here, Sierra. The cat stopped. I felt something inside me go cold. That's not Sierra. Isabella picked up the cat. It settled against her chest and started to purr. What is it? It's the cat. I know. What's its name? She looked at me. The question seemed to trouble her. She looked down at the cat's face and then toward the door as if somebody else might be standing there with the answer. It has a name, I said. Isabella shook her head. What is it? I don't know. She said it without crying. I reached over and took the cat from her. It twisted once in my hands and jumped to the floor. Then it walked beneath the bed and disappeared into the dark. Isabella watched it go. What was I calling it? I didn't answer. I sat beside her until the lamp flame started to flutter. The room smelled like cold cloth and oil. Outside the window, the fog pressed against the glass. It moved in slow folds, though there wasn't any wind I could feel inside. 3 years earlier, Sierra had gone north the same way Kinsley had. It had been morning then. The road was wet, and the fog had covered the fence line. Sierra put on her coat and told me she'd be back before morning. She'd said it softly, like she didn't want to wake Isabella. I told her not to go. She went anyway. I followed her as far as the last fence post. I could have grabbed her. I could have pulled her back. I didn't. The rules said the fog took people who crossed the fence. The rules said the lanterns kept the house safe. There wasn't anything else. No help coming. No road out. I watched Sierra walk into the gray. Her shoes stayed behind in the wet gravel. I told myself I'd done what I could. The fence was there for a reason. If the rules were all we had, breaking them would only get more people killed. I'd been telling myself that for 3 years. Isabella leaned against my arm. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Do you remember Mama's face?" I looked at the photograph in my hand. "Yes." She nodded, but I didn't think she believed me. Maybe she was trying to hold on to the answer. Maybe she already knew there were some things I couldn't keep for her. I got up and went to the front room. At the north window, the lantern had brightened. I checked the wick and turned it down a little. Too much flame used too much oil, and I didn't know how much we had left. The second can was in the cupboard beneath the sink. I took it out and set it beside the door. I wasn't going to sit beside Isabella and watch her lose everything the way I had watched Kinsley. The fog had come from the North Road in 1988. Everybody knew that. It had started there and spread through town, but nobody had ever gone beyond the fence to see where it began. Nobody had ever come back from trying. I didn't know what was out there. I didn't know if there was a source or a cause or just more fog stretching past the road forever. But if it had come from somewhere, then somewhere was where I needed to go. The rule said, never cross the fence. I had followed that rule while Sierra walked away. I had followed it while Kinsley went into the gray. I wasn't following it again. I took the oil lantern from the north window and checked the fuel. It was full enough. I set it by the door and picked up the second container. Then I went to Isabella's room and took her mother's old coat from the chair. Isabella was still awake. I held the coat out to her. "Put this on." "Are we going somewhere?" "I'm going somewhere." "Where?" I looked at her for a second. "I'm going to find a way to stop the fog. I'll be back before you have to sleep." She didn't ask how. She just looked at the coat. "Will you take me?" "No." "Dad, listen. You stay inside. Keep the lamp burning." She nodded. I wanted to tell her I wasn't going far. I wanted to tell her the fence was close, and I'd be back before the sky changed. I didn't tell her those things because they weren't true, or because I didn't know if they were true. She put on the coat. It hung down past her knees. I carried the lantern to the front door and set it beside the fuel. Isabella's coat was next to it, ready to be pulled on when the cold came through. I stood there before dawn with the lantern, the fuel, and Isabella's coat beside the door. I was reaching for the door when somebody came out of the fog. At first I thought it was one of the reachers. The shape was too tall and too dark around the edges, and there wasn't any sound of footsteps on the road. Then the figure came closer, and I saw a woman wearing a bright yellow jacket. She stopped a few yards away from the porch. The jacket was the sort of thing you could see from half a mile off. It had blue strips on the sleeves and a black zipper down the front. Her pants were dark and tight around the legs, and her boots looked too clean for Marrow Hollow. She carried something in one hand that gave off a pale blue light. She looked at me. "Hi," she said. Her voice was clear and young. "Can you tell me where Cedar Loop is?" I had no idea what Cedar Loop was. "Don't come any closer." She looked behind herself at the fog. Then she looked back at me. "Okay, I won't." She didn't sound like she was listening. She sounded like somebody trying to stay calm while deciding whether the other person was dangerous. I held the lantern out in front of me. The light reached her jacket and made it shine. There was no wetness on her, no gray vapor coming out of her mouth. Her hair was dry too, and her face had color in it. She looked warm. "Listen," I said. "You need to turn around and go back into the fog." "Back where?" "Wherever you came from." "I came from a hiking trail." There wasn't a hiking trail north of Marrow Hollow. There was the road, the fence, and the fog. That was all there had been for 30 years. She lifted the thing in her hand and pressed her thumb against it. The screen lit up brighter. She tapped it twice and held it up near her face. "There's no signal," she said. "I told you to go back." "Okay, but I don't know where back is. I got turned around about 20 minutes ago. I was on a marked trail and then the fog came in, and now I'm standing in a road talking to a guy carrying an oil lamp." She looked at the lantern when she said that. She didn't seem to know what to make of it. "What's your name?" I asked. She hesitated. "Brooke." I nodded. "I'm Ronnie." She gave a quick nod back. "Ronnie, where is Cedar Loop?" "I don't know." "It's on the map." She checked the phone again. I had no word for it then, but I knew it was some kind of little glass screen. There weren't any buttons except one on the side. It shone against her fingers without any flame or oil. Brooke tapped the screen again. "Still nothing," she said. "You need to leave the road." "Which way?" "South." She turned and looked down the road in the direction I pointed. The fog was thick there. The houses sat along both sides of it with their window lamps burning, though she didn't seem to see them. She looked past them like there was something farther away. "The sun's out that way," she said. "It isn't. It is where I came from. There's no sun tonight. It's not night." I didn't answer her. I looked at the sky above the road. It was the same dirty gray it had been every morning since the fog came. The light never got any brighter. The morning never moved on to day. Brooke took a step toward me. "Look, I don't know what's going on here. I just need a road out." "Don't come closer." She stopped again. The phone hung at her side. "You keep saying that. Because you keep coming closer. I was trying to get around you." She moved to her left. I moved the same way without thinking. The lantern swung between us and threw our shadows across the wet gravel. Her shadow went with her. Mine didn't. I looked down at my boots. They were standing in the gravel, but there wasn't a clear mark under them. The stones looked wet and dark between my feet. I could see the lantern's light on the road, but I couldn't feel any heat coming off it. The metal handle was cold in my hand. Brooke moved around me again. This time she came close enough that I could see the green in her eyes. She looked at my face and then at my shoulder. Her expression changed. She stepped forward. Her arm passed through the edge of my coat. It wasn't like touching somebody. There was no pressure, no cloth brushing cloth. For a second I could see the fog through the place where her sleeve crossed me, and then she jerked back with a sharp breath. "What the hell?" I looked at my coat. It was still there. My arm was still inside it. "Don't," I said. "I didn't touch you. You nearly walked through me." "I did not." She raised both hands. The phone was still in one of them. Her face had gone pale. "Okay, I'm sorry. I was trying to get around you." "You can't go that way." "I can't go any way. You just told me to go south, but you won't let me pass. Because you need to stay away from the houses." She looked past me again. This time she stared longer. Behind her I could see the road leading north, the row of homes, the fences, and the small lamps burning in every window. She saw something else. "There aren't any houses." "They're right there. Ronnie, I can see the road." I turned and pointed toward the nearest one. "That house, the one with the blue door." She didn't move. "There's a foundation." "What?" "There's a burned foundation where you're pointing." I looked at the house. The blue door was shut. Smoke stains ran up the siding beside the windows, though I didn't remember them being there before. The roof was whole. The porch boards were wet beneath the lantern light. "That's a house. It's rubble." She took another step back. The fog curled around the road behind her, but it didn't touch her boots. I looked at her jacket again. It was bright and smooth, made from some kind of thin material that didn't look like wool or canvas. She had a small pack on her back and a bottle clipped to one strap. The things she wore belonged somewhere else. They looked too new for a town where people patch the same coats year after year. "How did you get here?" I asked. "I told you I was hiking." "Hiking where?" "On Cedar Loop." "I don't know that place." "There's a trail map right here." She held the phone toward me. The screen showed lines and little colored marks. One of the lines made a loop around a green shape. Another line ran beside it. At the top were words I could read but didn't understand. Cedar Loop. The letters were sharp and small. They didn't look printed with ink. They seemed to be sitting inside the glass. "That's not a map," I said. "Yes, it is. No map is that size." She looked at the phone. "It's my phone." "I don't know what that means." She let out a breath through her nose. It wasn't quite a laugh. "Right. Okay. You're either messing with me or you're not from around here." "I live here." "Where?" I pointed at the house behind me. "There." She looked over my shoulder. Isabella's window lamp was burning in the room beyond the front wall. The yellow light showed through the curtains. Brooke's eyes narrowed. "There isn't a house there either." "Isabella's inside." "Who?" "My daughter." She stared at me like she'd heard something that made no sense. "Ronnie, there is no house. There are burned foundations all along this road. Trees are growing through some of them. The houses are right there. The town burned down." I felt a twinge of anger then. Not much, just enough to make my hand tighten around the lantern. "Marrow Hollow is still here." She shook her head. "Marrow Hollow burned to the ground in 1988. There were no survivors." The road went quiet after she said it. I could hear the fog moving against the fence. Somewhere behind me a clock ticked twice and stopped. The houses stayed where they were. The lamps stayed lit. The road continued into the gray. "What year did you say?" I asked. 1988. "No, you said there were no survivors." "That's what I said." "How do you know?" "Because it's on the trail information, and because everybody knows about it." She held the phone out again and tapped the screen. A different picture appeared. There were more words, a small photograph, and a date near the top. October 5th, 2024. I knew the numbers, but not the way they were arranged. The date sat above a picture of dark trees and a blue sky. There was sunlight in the picture. Real sunlight. It was yellow and strong across the trail. "It's 2024, she said. "This is the date." I looked from the screen to her face. "That can't be right." "Why not?" "Because the fog came in 1988. "Yeah, that's what I'm telling you." "No, it came in December. I remember it." "So do I. I mean, not personally. I wasn't alive then." She stopped and looked at me. "Wait, how old are you?" 30. She looked at the phone again. Her lips parted a little. 30? "Yes." "That would make you born in 1994. "I was born before the fog." She lowered the phone. "Ronnie, I don't know what you are." "I just told you." "No, you told me your name." She looked at the road by my boots. Her shadow stretched across the gravel and reached almost to mine. Mine still didn't seem to be there. The lantern light spread around my legs without catching on them the way it caught on hers. Brooke took a slow step backward. "The sun was shining when I came through," she said. "The road was dry. There were trees on both sides. Then everything went white, and I came out here." "There's been fog on this road since 1988. "Not where I was." "You said it came 20 minutes ago." "About that." "The road doesn't change in 20 minutes. She looked toward the burned foundations she saw. I looked toward the houses I saw. We were both looking at the same place, and neither of us could make the other see it. The clocks had never kept true time in Marrow Hollow. Our kitchen clock kept bad time. Kinsley's had been wrong. Orion's had been stuck at 11:17 ever since. I had always thought that was just another thing the fog had damaged. The morning had never changed either. It had been gray when the fog arrived. It was gray now. The same road, the same fence, the same cold light pressed against every window. Brooke's phone said 2024. She said the town had burned 30 years ago. I looked at the date on her phone and then at the burned foundations she saw, and understood that both versions of Marrow Hollow occupied the same north road. I looked at Brooke and then at the road again. The houses were still there on my side. The burned foundations were still there on hers. Same gravel, same fence, same gray air. The only difference was that her shadow crossed the road and mine didn't. I held the lantern ahead of me. The flame was burning bright enough, but no heat reached my hand. I could see the light on Brooke's jacket. I could see it on the wet stones. The light never touched me. My boots were standing on the gravel, but there weren't any marks beneath them. Brooke's boots had left 2 clear prints where she stepped back. The mud had pressed up around the soles. I looked at my hands. The skin across my knuckles looked pale, not winter pale. There was a gray color underneath it that hadn't been there before. My fingers felt numb, like I'd held them in ice water. "Ronnie," Brooke said, "I'm here. You need to listen to me." I kept looking at my hands. The town burned. "Yes. In 1988. That's what I told you. The fog came in 1988. I know." I looked past her toward the road. The fog was gathered there in a long wall, thick enough that the fence disappeared inside it. The houses of Marrow Hollow stood behind me with their lamps in the windows. The same lamps had been burning when I woke up that morning. The same gray morning had been there when Sierra left. The same clocks had been wrong for 30 years. Nobody had been living in that morning. We'd been kept in it. The thought came to me plain. The fire had taken the town, and whatever was left of us stayed where the fire had left us. The houses stood because we remembered them standing. The clocks didn't move because there wasn't anywhere for the time to go. Morning never became day because it had stopped being morning a long time ago. "Isabella's dead," I said. Brooke was quiet for a moment. I turned toward her. "She's in that house." "I know. She's my daughter." "I know, Ronnie. She died in the fire too." Brooke's face tightened. She looked like she wanted to say something that wouldn't make it worse. "The town is dead," she said. "Your family is dead." I shook my head. It wasn't that I thought she was wrong. I couldn't think what else to do with the words. Isabella had been in her room every night. She'd eaten food. She'd slept beside the lamp. She'd talked to me about her mother and the cat and the cold. She'd been real. So had I. I turned to the house where Isabella was waiting. Kinsley had been real too. She'd sat by her north window for days and watched the fence. I used to think the fog had found its way inside her. I thought it had pulled her names out one at a time until there wasn't enough of her left to fight it. But Kinsley hadn't been infected by anything. She'd been dying. Maybe she'd been dead already. Maybe all of us had. The fog had held her there until she was weak enough to move beyond it. Then those pale arms had reached through the boundary and taken what was ready to leave. The things in the fog hadn't lived in town. They weren't neighbors. They weren't people who'd been trapped in the fire with us. They were outside it, waiting on the other side. They took the ones who were ready. I thought of Kinsley's slippers in the road. Then I thought of Sierra's shoes. 3 years ago, Sierra had promised she'd be back before morning, standing right there on the gravel. She hadn't been attacked. She hadn't been dragged away while she was still alive. She'd died, and the fog had opened for her. She'd crossed the line. I had watched her go and called it something else because I couldn't bear the truth. The gray had spread past my knuckles by then. It looked like smoke beneath the skin. I bent my fingers and could barely feel them move. "Why is this happening?" I asked. Brooke moved toward me. I don't know. You came through the fog. I came through a trail. You opened it. I didn't mean to. My hands started shaking. The lantern rattled against its handle and the flame jumped inside the glass. I tried to picture Sierra's face. I could see her hair, brown hair pulled back from her eyes. I could see the shape of her coat. In the photograph, one hand rested on Isabella's shoulder. Her face wouldn't stay. I knew there had been a smile. I knew there was a crease beside her mouth. I knew there was a little crease beside her mouth, and one side of her hair had come loose near her ear. Those were pieces. They were all I had. I closed my eyes and tried harder. Nothing. Sierra, I said. The name came out of me. I knew the name. I just couldn't find the face that belonged to it. Ronnie, you have to come with me. I opened my eyes. Brooke was standing at the edge of the fog. Part of her jacket was in the clear daylight she saw, and part of it was washed gray by the air around me. Her shadow crossed the gravel behind her. It reached into the fog but didn't disappear. Walk out this way, she said. Come toward the sun. I can't. You can. I came through. Isabella's inside. Then bring her. I faced the house again. The front door was only a short walk away. It had always been a short walk away. I could have crossed it in a few seconds. The road tilted under my boots. How long do I have? Brooke looked toward the fog behind her. I don't know. Tell me. I don't know, okay? I'm trying to figure this out too. She held up her phone. The screen was still lit, though it had no signal. My being here is keeping the opening between our worlds from closing. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm alive and you're not. Maybe the fog needs something from one side to touch the other. Can you take Isabella? If she reaches the seam, yes. A dead person can cross toward the things in the fog, or a living person can go back to 2024. That's what I've seen happen. Seen happen where? I haven't seen it happen. I mean, I know that's what this is. I know what I'm looking at. She rubbed her free hand over her face. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't look away from me. If I leave, the opening could close, she said. If it closes while you're still in there, then Isabella stays trapped in the gray. So do you. You won't get another chance to take her across. The gray had reached the first joints of my fingers. My hands looked thinner than they had a minute earlier. I could see the gravel through the edge of one thumb when I held it against the lantern light. I started toward home. Ronnie, wait. Isabella is inside. You need to walk out with me. I said I'm taking her across. I wasn't sure she'd heard me. I didn't stop to find out. The road moved beneath me in uneven steps. I kept hold of the lantern even though it gave me no warmth. The houses leaned in the fog. Their windows glowed yellow. Somewhere behind one of them, Isabella was waiting for me to come back. Brooke followed me from the northern road. She stayed half in the daylight and half in the gray, calling to me as she came. Ronnie, don't go too far. I reached the walk. Ronnie, listen. If the seam closes, you lose her. I climbed the steps. Gray spread through my hands, and Brooke Noble called after me from the open seam. I opened the door and stepped inside. The house looked the same as it had when I left it. The same cold room, the same table by the wall, the same second can of fuel sitting beside the door where I'd put it. Everything was where it belonged, which made it worse. Brooke was still outside calling after me. Ronnie, wait. You can't take her in there. I didn't answer. I went down the hall to Isabella's room carrying the lantern. The flame stayed steady behind the glass. It lit the walls and the floor and the edge of the bed. Isabella was curled up beneath the blanket. Her mother's old coat was still around her shoulders. She'd taken one sleeve off while sleeping, and her hand rested on top of the blanket. The light went through it. Not all the way. I could see the yellow glow between her fingers and the bones beneath the skin. Her hand looked thinner than it had that morning. It looked like something made from wax left too close to a window. I stood there for a second. Then I set the lantern down and touched her shoulder. "Isabella." She moved a little but didn't wake up. I touched her again. "Isabella, wake up." Her eyes opened. She looked at me without fear. She usually looked afraid when I woke her before daylight, but this time she just looked tired. "Dad, I'm here." She looked toward the lantern. "Why are you carrying the lantern?" I picked it back up. "We're going to the north fence together." She sat up slowly. The coat slid down one shoulder. "Why?" "I need to take you somewhere." "Where?" "The north fence." She frowned at that. "Why do we have to go there?" I didn't have a good answer that wouldn't tell her everything. The truth was she was already dead. The town was dead. The fog had kept us moving through the same morning for 3 decades, and it was starting to let go of her. I wasn't going to tell her that while she was sitting in bed with one hand shining through. "We're going to meet Brooke," I said. "Who is Brooke?" I looked at her. She'd already forgotten. Not all of it. Just the name. Maybe it had been there when I woke her and disappeared while she slept. That was how it worked. A name went first, then the face, then the words. Orion had told me that, and I hadn't believed it enough. "She's outside," I said. "Is she nice?" "She's trying to help us." Isabella looked down at her hand. She turned it over and watched the light move through her palm. "Why is my hand like that?" I didn't answer right away. She looked at me. "Dad?" "It's the fog." "Am I sick?" "No." That wasn't true either, but sick wasn't the word for it. Sick meant there was something in you that could be fought. This was something leaving. She pulled the other hand out from beneath the coat. It was pale too, though not as clear as the first. I could see the lamp through the tips of her fingers. "Will it go back?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to promise we'd go to the fence, come home, and she'd sleep until noon. I wanted to put the lantern on the table and leave her in that room where I could still pretend the rules worked. Keeping her there would only hold her in the fog. The lamp kept the house safe. That was what we'd always said. Keep the lantern burning and the fog stayed outside. But Isabella was already inside it in a way the lamp couldn't stop. Her body was hollowing out. If I left her in the room, then she'd lose more names, then faces, then speech. She'd sit beside the window like Kinsley had, waiting for something she couldn't remember wanting. If I carried her to Brooke and crossed the fence, she could reach an ending. I had no idea what came after that. Maybe there was nothing. Maybe the fog took her and I lost her anyway. But there was no ending in that house. There was only more morning and less of her. I reached down and picked her up. She was light in my arms. I knew that before, but I'd never carried her while part of her was disappearing. Her body fit against my chest and the coat bunched under my arm. She put both arms around my neck. "Dad, where are we going?" "North." "Is it cold?" "Some." She rested her cheek against my shoulder. "I don't remember Brooke." "I know." "Did I know her before?" "No." Isabella didn't ask anything else. She looked over my shoulder at the room as I carried her out. Her bed was unmade. The blanket had fallen onto the floor. The little lamp beside the window burned with a weak yellow flame. I left it there. Brooke stood on the porch when I came outside. The daylight behind her made the fog look darker. I could see the road in both directions. In front of me were the houses and the fence. Behind Brooke were the blackened foundations and the trees growing through them. She looked at Isabella and then at me. "You brought her." "I said I would." "I know. I just didn't know if you could." I stepped off the porch. The lantern hung from my right hand. Isabella was in my left arm and against my chest. Her coat covered most of her, but I could still see the pale shape of her fingers where they held my collar. Brooke moved backward to keep the space between us. "Come toward me," she said. "Don't go straight to the fence. The fence is north. Ronnie, listen, you need to come through the seam. I know where I'm going. You don't. You think you're walking to a fence, but that isn't what I see." I kept walking. The road was wet under my boots. The road had stayed wet my whole life. The lantern swung a little with every step and threw light over the gravel. Isabella's breath was cold against my neck. Brooke followed us from behind. She stayed near the open daylight but didn't let the fog close around her. "Ronnie, come this way." I didn't look back. "Ronnie, please." I looked down at Isabella. Her eyes were open. "Are you scared?" I asked. She shook her head against my coat. "Where are we going?" "The north fence." "Why?" I held her tighter. "Because I said I'm taking you across." She didn't ask what across meant. She put her face against me again and went quiet. I kept walking toward the fence post ahead. The fog had changed by then. It wasn't pressed flat against the road anymore. It stood in tall folds on both sides, with shapes moving inside it. I could see long arms hanging down, pale arms. They were too thin and too long, and the hands almost reached the ground. The reachers were there. They didn't come forward. They didn't reach for us. They stood along the road with their arms lowered and their bodies turned toward me. Some were close enough that I could have thrown a stone and hit them. I wasn't going to throw anything. Brooke stopped behind us. "Ronnie," she said. I heard the fear in her voice. She'd seen them before, or something like them. She'd watched Kinsley go. She knew what the fog could do. I didn't stop. One of the pale forms shifted in the gray. It unfolded a little farther, like somebody waking up in a chair. Its head turned toward Isabella. I moved her face against my shoulder so she couldn't see it. "They're not moving," Brooke said. "I know. Why aren't they moving?" "I don't know." The reachers had taken Kinsley because she was ready. They'd taken Sierra because she was dead. Isabella was dead too, but she wasn't ready to leave me. Maybe that was enough to keep them back. Maybe they were waiting for me to hand her over. I wasn't going to hand her over. The fence post stood ahead of us in the gravel. It leaned a little toward the road. The wood was dark with moisture and the wire ran from it into the fog on both sides. I passed the place where Kinsley had been taken. Her slippers were gone. The gravel held no mark, no torn cloth, no blood, no gray vapor. Nothing to show she'd ever stood there except the part of me that still saw her leaving. Isabella lifted her head. "Who lived here?" "Kinsley." She thought about the name. "I know that name." I looked at her face. "You do?" She nodded, though I didn't think she knew from where. Then she put her head back down. The reachers stood on both sides of the road. Their long forms didn't move. I reached the fence post with Isabella in my arms. I got to the fence post with Isabella in my arms. The wood was slick under my shoulder when I leaned against it. The wire disappeared into the fog on either side. The road ended there as far as I knew. There was nowhere else to go except into the gray. Isabella lifted her head from my shoulder. "Where is Mama?" I looked at her. Her face was pale in the lantern glow. I could see the fence post through the loose strands of her hair, and the fog moved behind her like something breathing slow. I knew who she meant. "Sierra went ahead," I said. "She's waiting in a warm place. You'll find her there." Isabella watched me for a second. "Is she warm?" "Yes." "Does she have her coat?" "She does." I didn't know that. I didn't know whether it had a source, a cause, or only more fog beyond the road. But I knew Sierra had been cold when she left. She'd stood on the road in her dark coat with her hands tucked under her arms, and she'd looked back at me before she walked north. I'd told her I'd come after her. 3 years was plenty of time to keep somebody waiting. I set Isabella down beside the fence post. Her boots touched the wet gravel and she swayed a little. I caught her by the arm until she found her balance. She still had her mother's old coat on. It hung around her like it belonged to somebody twice her size. The lantern swayed from my hand. Its light went across the road and caught the fence wire, but it didn't put any warmth into the air. I could feel the cold moving through my fingers. They'd gone numb a while ago. Now the numbness had reached my wrists. Isabella held out her hand. I took it. Her fingers were small and colder than mine. That didn't seem possible, but it was true. I wrapped my hand around hers and kept her close to the fence post. The reachers lined the road. They'd been there when I came up. I hadn't paid much attention to them because I was carrying Isabella and trying to keep my feet under me. Now they started to move. Not all at once. One shifted farther into the road, then another. Their long bodies leaned out of the gray. I could see the pale skin on their arms and the fingers hanging almost to the gravel. Their heads were bent toward Isabella. She kept her eyes off them. "Are they waiting?" she asked. "I think so." "For us?" I squeezed her hand. "Maybe." That wasn't much of an answer. I didn't have a better one. Kinsley had been ready when they took her. They'd taken Sierra after she died. They hadn't touched Isabella while she was in the house. Maybe the lamp had kept them back. Maybe she hadn't been ready then. Or maybe I'd been the thing holding them off. The gray beneath my skin had reached past my wrists. It looked darker where it crossed the backs of my hands. The lantern's glow showed through the edge of my thumb. A thin, bright line of gravel showed through it. Isabella watched where our hands were joined. "Dad? I'm here. Your hand looks funny." "I know. Are you hurt?" "No." That wasn't exactly true. I wasn't hurt the way a person gets hurt. There wasn't any blood. Nothing was broken. I was coming apart. Her eyes went back to the road. One of the reachers had come near, its arm resting against the fog beside us. The arm was pale and jointed. It bent in the middle in the wrong place. She hadn't fought. She hadn't screamed. She just kept walking north while I watched her go, telling myself she'd come back. I let go of her hand. Not all the way at first. I loosened my fingers and felt hers slip against my palm. She looked up at me. Her face held no fear. She looked tired, the way she'd looked when I woke her in her room. I could have held on. That was the worst part. My hand still worked. I could have pulled her against me and carried her back to the house. I could have kept the lantern burning and made her sleep near the window. We could have stayed there through another morning and another one after that. She'd forget my face eventually. Maybe she'd forget Sierra's name. Maybe she'd forget the house. Maybe she'd forget what it meant to be afraid. I could keep her from the fog for a while, but I couldn't keep the fog from taking pieces of her. I had already done this once. I'd let Sierra walk north because I couldn't stop her. This time I knew what I was doing. "Isabella," I said. She looked at me. "Are you going to stay with me?" "I don't know." That was the truth. It was the first one I could give her. The reacher came out of the fog. Its arm unfolded toward us. It moved slowly at first, like it had to work its way through thick water. The elbow bent too far. The hand opened and closed once. Isabella's fingers were still resting in mine. I released them. Her hand dropped to her side. The pale arm wrapped around her waist. She didn't cry out. The reacher pulled her back against it, and the front of her coat lifted away from her body. I stepped forward without meaning to, but my legs wouldn't move right. My boots slid on the gravel and the lantern struck my knee. "Isabella." She turned her head toward me. The reacher pulled her into the gray a little farther. Its arm crossed her chest. I could see her face between the pale fingers. She wasn't afraid. That hurt worse than if she'd screamed. I tried to catch her, but she was already beyond my hand. The fog closed around her shoulders. Her hair disappeared. Then the top of her coat. Then her face. I kept my hand out until there was nothing left to reach for. The reacher pulled Isabella into the gray until only her small shoes remained on the gravel beside the final post. The shoes didn't move. They sat side by side in the gravel where Isabella had been standing, small and wet, and pointed toward the fog. I held my hand out for a while. I don't know how long. She was gone and my hand was empty, but I kept it there like she might come back and take it. Ronnie. Brooke's voice came from behind me. She sounded farther away than she was. I lowered my hand and looked toward her. She stood on the other side of the open seam with the daylight behind her. Her jacket looked too bright for the road, too clean. "You need to come now," she said. I turned back to the fog. The reachers were still there. I could see them through the gray, their pale arms hanging down and their heads turned toward the place where Isabella had disappeared. They hadn't followed her. They hadn't come after me either. "Ronnie, come on." I picked up the lantern. I'd set it down when I reached for Isabella, and it had tipped onto its side in the gravel. The flame was still burning behind the glass. It looked smaller than before, but it was steady. Brooke came toward me, then stopped at the edge of the seam. "Leave the lantern," she said. I looked at her. "Just come through. You don't need it anymore." That wasn't true. The lantern had been the first thing I checked every morning. It was the thing I'd carried from room to room when the fog crowded the windows. It was the reason we kept the doors shut and the curtains drawn. It was the one rule that had stayed simple. Keep the lamp burning. I thought about all the nights Isabella had slept beside it. I thought about the little lamp in her room, still burning by the window. That one hadn't kept her from hollowing out. It hadn't kept the fog from getting inside her. Maybe the lamps never kept anything out. Maybe they only kept us in. "I can't leave it," I said. "You can. You need to. Isabella's gone." "I know. I can't leave her here by herself." Brooke turned to the fog. "She's not by herself." I knew what she meant. The reachers were out there. Whatever waited beyond them was out there too. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but there wasn't another answer. Brooke rubbed her hands together. She was cold. I could tell by the way she held her arms close to her body. The living got cold. I used to think that was just one more thing to complain about, but now it seemed like proof of something. "Ronnie, please." I looked at the open seam behind her. The road on her side was dry. Trees stood along it with bare branches and a little light gathered between them. I couldn't see the blackened foundations from where I stood, but I knew they were there. I knew that was the place she came from. 2024. A whole world past the fog. I could step toward it. Brooke had done it. She'd come through the trail and found us on the road. She said I could go back with her. She said I was dead, and the dead didn't belong in the daylight. That was probably true. I put the lantern on top of the fence post. The wood was wet and black under my hand. The flame made a small yellow patch on the gravel. Brooke took another step. "What are you doing?" "Nothing. You're not coming through." I didn't answer. I watched the lantern flame move behind the glass. It leaned when the wind passed, then straightened again. The lantern wasn't warm against my fingers anymore. I could barely feel the metal handle when I picked it back up. The gray had reached my elbows. I checked my arms. The skin was pale and thin. The dark color underneath had spread in uneven patches, like smoke trapped under ice. My coat sleeve sagged where my arm had lost some of its weight. Brooke saw it too. "Ronnie, you don't have much time." "How much?" "I don't know." "Tell me." "I don't know, okay?" She looked angry when she said it, but it wasn't anger at me. She was scared and didn't know where to put it. I understood that. I'd been doing the same thing for 30 years. "I can still get you out," she said. "You just have to walk this way." I faced the daylight. She was right there. It wasn't far. A few steps, maybe less than that. I could have crossed over and stood beside her. I could have felt the sun on my face if the sun was warm. I could have found out what the outside world looked like when it wasn't covered in gray. But the shoes were still in the gravel. I couldn't take Isabella across. I couldn't follow her into the fog. I couldn't go back to a world where she didn't exist and pretend that was a life. None of them were good. There was just the choice I could stand to make. "I said I'm taking her across," I told Brooke. She stared at me. "You already let her go." "I know." "Then come with me." I shook my head. "Ronnie." I turned toward the fence post. The reachers hadn't moved. Their arms still hung beside them, pale against the fog. One of them stood close to the shoes. Its hand was almost touching the gravel. I wondered if it could see me. I wondered if it knew I was staying. The lantern sat between us on the post. It had kept the dead houses lit. It had kept the windows yellow and the rooms in place. It had kept the clock stopped and the morning from ending. Every night I filled it with oil and told myself I was protecting Isabella. I wasn't protecting her. I was keeping her here. The thought was plain enough that I didn't argue with it. The lamp had held everyone in Marrow Hollow. It had held Sierra. It had held Kinsley. It had held me. Maybe the fog needed the light. Maybe the light was the thing that gave the fog something to hold. I reached for the lantern. Brooke moved forward. "Don't." I took it off the fence post. "Ronnie, wait." I set it on the ground beside Isabella's shoes. The flame shone through the glass and made a little circle of yellow around them. The shoes looked like they belonged to a child who'd gone outside and would be back soon. That was how things worked in the town. Everything looked ready for somebody to come home. I unscrewed the top. The flame burned low inside the lantern. It was a small thing. Just oil and fire and glass. Nothing that should have had the power to hold a town together. I put my mouth near the opening. "Ronnie, don't do this." I looked at Brooke once more. Her face was wet. I don't know if it was rain or tears. She was still on the living side and I was still on mine. Then I blew out the lantern beside the fence post and remained on the Marrow Hollow side as the fog dissolved me. I stayed where I was for a few seconds after Ronnie disappeared. The lantern had gone dark. The yellow circle on the gravel was gone. All that remained on his side of the fence was gray fog and two small shoes sitting beside the post. I could still see them even though the seam had started to close. It pulled in at the edges like a curtain being drawn from both sides. The blackened foundations behind me blurred and thinned. The trees on the trail came through next, then the fence post. Ronnie had put the lantern down beside the shoes and blown it out. I kept expecting him to change his mind. Maybe he'd pick it back up. Maybe he'd come through after me. People do that in movies anyway. They make the hard choice and then find a way to undo it before anybody has to live with it. Ronnie didn't. I stepped backward through the opening. The cold went away first, then the smell of wet ash. My boots landed on the cedar loop trail and the seam snapped shut in front of me. There was no flash or loud noise. It just folded into itself and became a patch of gray morning between two trees. I waited for the road to show back up. It didn't. The trail looked the way it had before. Brown dirt, dead leaves, bare branches overhead. The air smelled like pine and damp soil instead of smoke and something rotten. I could hear a bird somewhere farther down the trail. It made one short call and then stopped. I checked my hands. They were still my hands. No gray under the skin. No light shining through my fingers. No dark patches spreading up my arms. I turned them over twice just to make sure. That was when I started shaking. I sat down on the edge of the trail and put my head between my knees. I wasn't hurt. I hadn't fallen. Nothing had happened to my body that I could see, but I was shaking hard enough that my teeth clicked together. I kept thinking about Ronnie asking me not to leave yet. He hadn't said it like a threat. He hadn't said it because he wanted me trapped there. He'd said it because Isabella was gone and he didn't know what else to do. He'd been carrying that lantern for so long that he couldn't imagine setting it down, even with nothing left to protect. I understood that part. I just didn't understand how somebody could choose the fog when the way out was right in front of him. After a while, I stood up and started down the trail. It couldn't have been more than half an hour, but the hike felt longer than it had on the way in. I kept looking over my shoulder. Every time I did, the trail was empty. No gray road, no burned town, no pale arms between the trees. Just me and the woods and the sound of my own boots. I had my phone in my pocket. I took it out once to check the time, but the screen was scratched and my hand was still trembling, so I put it away. The date was still there, 2024. That was the part that made sense. I found the other hikers near the trailhead. There were 3 of them gathered beside the map board. One man had a red pack and a walking stick. A woman was drinking from a metal bottle. The third was younger than both of them and had his hands shoved into the pockets of a gray sweatshirt. They all looked over when I came out of the trees. The woman lowered her bottle. "Are you okay?" "Yeah." I wasn't. But it was the first answer that came to me. The man with the red pack looked past me into the woods. "Were you alone?" I glanced back. The trail behind me was quiet. The morning light had come up a little while I was gone, though it was still gray under the trees. The space between the trees held no road. The town was gone too. The little girl's shoes weren't beside the fence. "Yes," I said. The younger hiker pulled his hands out of his sweatshirt pockets. "Did you get lost?" "No." That answer sounded worse than the first one. The woman moved toward me. "Do you need us to call somebody?" I thought about calling somebody. The police. Search and rescue. Anybody who might have a number for the dead. I pictured trying to explain the seam and the fog and a man who had stayed behind because his daughter was gone. I pictured saying Isabella's name and hearing it disappear from the air. "No," I said. "Don't call anyone." The man with the red pack looked at the other 2. "Maybe we should get her back to the parking lot." "I can walk." Nobody argued with me. That was good. I didn't want to be touched. I didn't want to explain why my jacket was wet or why I kept staring at the space between the trees. We started toward the trailhead together. The path was wide enough for 2 people, so I walked along the edge and let them stay in front of me. Their shoes made ordinary sounds on the dirt. Leaves crushed under their soles. The walking stick tapped every few steps. It was the most normal thing I'd heard all morning. The woman turned around as she walked. "Were you out here all night?" "No." "Did you see anyone else?" I almost said yes. I kept my eyes on the trail. There was a pine cone near my boot. It had been split open by something and the seeds were gone. "There was a man," I said. The hikers slowed down. "What man?" the younger one asked. I could see Ronnie at the fence post, his coat sleeve sagging around an arm that was becoming smoke. His hand still reaching after Isabella was already gone. The little shoes sitting in the gravel. He'd asked me not to leave yet. "I don't know," I said. "He lives out there." The man with the red pack frowned. "Lives where?" I stopped walking. The others stopped too. For a second, nobody said anything. The woods were quiet around us. No birds this time. No wind. Just the 4 of us standing on the trail with the map board somewhere ahead. I looked at each of their faces. "If you hear a man asking you to stay," I said, "don't answer him." The younger hiker gave a nervous laugh. What? Don't answer him. Don't go looking for him. The woman lowered her bottle. Is he hurt? I don't know. Then what are we supposed to do? Keep walking. The man with the red pack looked back down the trail. Is this some kind of joke? No. I could hear how I sounded. I knew how it looked. A stranger comes out of the trees and tells you not to answer an unseen man. That isn't something a reasonable person says. I would have thought the same thing yesterday. But yesterday I hadn't seen a road that belonged to a dead town. I hadn't watched a little girl disappear into fog. I hadn't watched the man carrying the lantern decide there was no way back. Don't search for the shoes either, I said. That got their attention. What shoes? The woman asked. I looked behind me once more. The trail was still empty. Just don't. Nobody spoke after that. We kept moving toward the trailhead. The man with the red pack walked faster. The younger hiker stayed close to the woman. They didn't ask me anything else, and I was glad because I didn't have any more answers. The trees thinned ahead. Beyond them was the parking area and the road and the rest of the living world. Cars would pass there. Phones would work. People would complain about the weather and ask how far it was to the next overlook. That was how it should be. I let the hikers go ahead of me. Before they reached the trailhead, I called after them. Listen. They turned around. If you hear him ask you to stay, keep walking. If you see shoes lying in the road, leave them there.